I think I speak for almost all Palestinians when I say that our view of our conflict with Zionism has been marked from the beginning by the feeling that we were absent from the picture. We are not players in the game of nations. That from the very beginning, the issue was a land without a people for a people without a land. To this day, I feel that a lot of the interest and attention in the Palestinian question comes in large part because we are the adversary, the counterpoint, the other to Jews who are, in fact, important in Western eyes. So the first thing that comes to my mind is to enter into dialogue with the other. We must begin by declaring our narrative, who we are, what is our story, making sure that our voices are heard. And to a very large extent, thanks to people like you, and thanks to courageous Jewish voices on the other side, our story is beginning to be heard. Our narrative is beginning to be visible and to be part of the discussion. For me and for others in the peace and justice mold who care about dialogue and who want to engage in dialogue, we face the danger of the two narratives approach. The two narratives approach basically says, just like you Palestinians have your narrative, which ought to be heard, so also the Israelis have their narrative, which needs to be equally heard. It's a question not of right and wrong, but it's a question of two rights. So good so far. Then this slowly shades into a false symmetry that implies that the two are the same or are of equal weight. That the occupier and the occupied, the oppressor and the oppressed, the powerful and the weak are basically the same. And that we should listen to both, and we should try to understand both, and we should try to bring them both together and sort of split it down the middle. You bring 5 Arab children and 5 Jewish children, and they sing one verse in Hebrew and one verse in Arabic of Kumbaya, and everything is fine because we have achieved balance and symmetry in a situation that is totally asymmetrical. So, for this reason, many of the efforts at peace and reconciliation become almost anathema, become themselves ways of perpetuating an evil and an oppressive status quo. How do we break out of that mold? I say that in the full confidence that there are two narratives, that the Jewish people have suffered throughout their history, particularly from Christian anti-Semitism. There are problems with Muslim and Middle Eastern countries, as there always have been. But the level, the persistence, the systematic, the theological, the institutional anti-Semitism that the Jews suffered from and which culminated in the Holocaust, there is nothing like that. But having recognized that, how do we move forward? Well, initially, I thought that the best way to move forward is through universalism. I'm a lawyer. I'm a human rights activist, and I love the fact that the law, even bad laws, have this quality built into them of equality. The law is not a law unless it is applied, and applied equally to everybody. And if the law on its face says this law doesn't apply to everybody, well, then you can easily challenge it and see how oppressive and how wrong it is. The problem with apartheid is that while it was a legal system, it was a legal system that specified rights for different races differently. I love the fact that there is something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which everybody can appeal. So universalism and universal values and a rejection of exceptionalism and a rejection of privilege, for me, was basic. I picked 3 elements that should be found if we want to move towards genuine dialogue and coexistence. The first is empathy. Empathy. We need to learn each other's stories. We need to try and walk in each other's shoes. We need to feel the pain of the other and join in their hopes and dreams and nightmares. Second, plurality. We must accept and embrace the fact that we are not all the same. While we are all equal, we are not all the same. We are different, and yet we can find ways in which we can complement each other or coexist with each other. And that plurality does not mean exclusivity. Plurality means we are all equal, but we are all different. Third and finally, integrity. If we are going to seek peace, we must have integrity. The kind of lovey-dovey pretending that there are no problems, pushing them under the rug, appealing and smiling at each other while we hide our true feelings and our true intentions is not a way to move forward. I think this is where I'd like our dialogue this evening to go. Things that fall within these 3 categories, I think, will be useful and helpful.
We can't come to the table as if we all have the same amount of power and privilege. And that part of what we're doing, and kind of when I'm excited about what we're building at JVP, and actually this summer we're having an inaugural gathering of the Interfaith Network for Justice in Palestine, where we're bringing together about 50 leaders of different faith communities, Abrahamic and not, to sit down at a table, not just for the kind of kumbaya experience that you described, but for an honest reckoning about the power and privilege we all hold and what it's going to take for us to kind of work together, right? So it's not just like we all say our different kind of blessing over the bread, right? It's like actual getting to work and rolling up our sleeves. And the title of that gathering is called Co-Resistance Before Coexistence. And that what that means is that in order to get to a place where there is a possibility for coexistence, we need to be in the process of co-resisting oppression together in all the ways that that looks.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said about co-resistance before coexistence. Because the worst thing about dialogue is when it becomes a substitute to action.
Yes.
It becomes a nice way to, for the oppressed to let off steam and for the oppressor to assuage their conscience. We don't want that. We want action and joint action towards against oppression. But I actually want to say that we are now at a moment where we can, in fact, move towards a better future. which I don't think we were able to do before. And let me explain this a little bit more. For many years, the two-state solution was a nice, easy out for both sides, as well as for the international community. You didn't really have to worry about Zionism and what does it mean and what does a Jewish state mean, because, look, we got it solved. We have two states, one for Jews, one for Arabs, living side by side. Everything is hunky-dory, fine. And for the Palestinians also, it became almost a way out. We don't really have to deal with the hard issues because we are working our way towards a Palestinian state. And once we have a state, that sort of solves our problem. We have our identity, we have a flag, we have a passport, everything is fine. And of course, for the Arab world and for the international community, that was the best thing around. But after working at it for more than 40 years and seeing it's not happening, and after not only the evidence on the ground, but finally something snapped at the last election when Netanyahu said, who are you kidding? It's not going to happen, not on my watch. And all of a sudden there was an epiphany. Aha, really? Well, if it's not happening, then what? Where do we go from here? If Israeli Arabs, the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, are not going to count in elections, they are really marginalized totally. And if the West Bankers aren't going to have a state, and the Gazans, forget about them, we already have. And the refugees in the diaspora, they're not our problem. Then what? Where do we go from here? And the answers are not simple. And the crisis is not only a crisis for Israel. What does it mean to have a Jewish state with all these non-Jews around? It's also a crisis for Palestinians. If we're not going to have a state, what are we going to have? What are we going to aspire to? What is our goal? What is our vision? Can we, in fact, coexist in the land, the Holy Land, the whole of the land? And how? And anti-Semitism is a worldview, and it's a personal attitude that's aimed at all Jewish people. Its hallmark is the generalization. All of them are like that. They in the collective, where you don't see the other as an individual or as a human being, you see them as part of a collective. And when I gave my remarks and I mentioned how many Arabs and Muslims see Jews today, when you start with all of you, it's very easy to slide into anti-Semitism. How do you break it down? You break it down when you begin to see individual Jewish people as human beings. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate people like Jewish Voices for Peace or Independent Jewish Voices in Canada, and some very few Israeli Jews that I know, not only because they help Palestine and Palestinians and the Palestinian cause, but because they help me and others not to be anti-Semitic. They help us to see Jewish individuals who, out of their own religious tradition, are saying, this is wrong, this is unjust, we cannot be part of it. In fact, we have an obligation to oppose it. That's what breaks down anti-Semitism.